works. I got a million things going on all at once that happened all at once. And so, hi, how you doing? Everybody has freaking lost it. You don't need me to tell you that. You turn on the news and things are pretty crazy right now. And it doesn't matter what side or sides, or I don't know how many sides there are, you are on any given issue. And I don't remember the world being this tumultuous. I'm sure it always was. It just seems like, I think with social media, it like puts it right in front of our face all the time. It's not just, like when some of us were kids and it just happened slowly and you kind of got like bits and bobs. Now you can get like, every few seconds you can see stuff that's going on, and you have information and misinformation and all kinds of other stuff. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much because, I just don't want this to be a political channel. I really don't. That's not my focus, or that's not what I really like to talk about all the time. Sorry, I'm moving things around here. Anyhow, it struck me though that so many people are getting so upset by everything that's going on in the world that they start to take it on themselves to do something about it. And I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people feel like they have to do something because you see this stuff all the time. Hold on, I'm gonna get my Diet Coke here. You have to do something. You see stuff all the time. You see the news that's going on all the time. You see people doing something, and you think to yourself, well, maybe I should do something too. What could I possibly do? And I think even, when we're not seeing people doing anything about any particular issue, if you look at stuff like, just say the wealth tax or something like that, or, wealth inequality, you start to think to yourself, well, maybe I could do something about this, or I should join something or do whatever. And, listen, we've only got so much time and energy on our hands. And I'm not saying don't do anything. I'm saying don't feel guilty. And I understand. The only thing, yes, hey, how you doing? The only thing for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. I forget what that quote is from, but I believe that. But I also believe that, any one of us can only do so much, and we also have all this other stuff that's going on in our lives. And I don't, once again, I don't mean don't do anything and say, well, you know what, I'm busy, I've got my own stuff going on, I can't help anybody or anything. I'm not saying that, but that's the other thing, is so many of us are just so busy right now, just trying to survive. And we've also kind of scheduled ourselves to death with all these other things. And if you've got younger kids, you know all about that. And if you take on any other responsibilities, like I have, you have all these other things going on. So I've got work, I've got gigs, I've got recovery, I've got, spending enough time with the people that I love, et cetera. And, we all have so much going on. And then you think to yourself, well, what other energy or time or resources do I have to give to anything else? And backing up, we already feel like we're not doing enough in our own lives. We feel like we're not being productive enough. We're not improving ourselves enough. We're not being, industrious enough. And some of that's programming, and some of that's our own hang-ups, or whatever you want to call them, which is probably still programming to a certain extent. And we get all these messages from everywhere that we need to be doing this, and we need to be thinner, and we need to be making more money, and we need to, organize our house better. And, listen, none of those things is bad. But, I end up thinking to myself, my God, how can I do all those things? But I feel like they're all really important, and then trying to pick, what am I going to focus on, is tough. Because once you start to focus on something, even when you're doing something in a given moment, you can't be, you're not doing those other things. And that's really, really frustrating, just with your own goals. And so you take all that, and then you add all this other stuff that you see going on in the world, and think to yourself, man, I need to do something about this. It gets, you can put yourself on a real guilt trip, and it can get really, really overwhelming. And life is not about being overwhelmed. We get overwhelmed, but I certainly, that's not the direction I want to go. And yeah, it seems like people have lost their minds in general. There's not, and I think there's a few things going on, and this is just my opinion, but we're tribal creatures. That's our nature. And I harp on this book a lot. I think it's probably, you could probably put it in the evolutionary biology camp, but it's by Carl Sagan and his wife Andrew, and it's from the early 90s. They're talking about shadows of our forgotten ancestors, and they look at chimpanzee society. Chimps are brutal creatures. They're very, very tribal creatures. They're very loving on their family groups, But if they see somebody else that is not of their group, they beat the crap out of them. And, they can murder each other, all that kind of stuff. It's really, really fierce, brutal competition. They got fierce hierarchies within their groups. And, they're our closest living ancestors, so we're not that far off from them. We carry a lot of this emotional or biological baggage in our heads. And so we're geared towards being tribal. It was a survival mechanism at one time because people that were other could be dangerous. And it's something that we carry with us and that flashes when anything is different. And I forget the study. There's been a bunch of studies done on this. But when you start seeing a group of people as different, you start seeing them as not human. And that's a really dangerous thing. You start to see them as somehow just less than you, or they're not just not the same, but they're less than human. And there's a really more famous study where they're showing people getting injured. And I think they're injuring their hand or something like that. I forget what it was. And if it was an obvious racial difference between the viewer and the person that's supposedly getting hurt, they had less of a response. They hooked them up to all the electrodes on their brains and measured whatever it was they were measuring at that time. And that's freaky. They didn't see them, it wasn't as distressing to them. And when they were told they were members of a different religion or different group or different, political ideology or whatever, or they were their member of their same group, they would have different responses to watching this person get hurt. And so you could, and these are perfectly reasonable people that maybe don't have a malicious bone in their body, but they see somebody else as other. So now amplify that to where we are now, to some of the disagreements we're having. And when you see somebody else with a different ideology from a different place, and things get really heated and we're getting bombarded by all this stuff, and the things we're hearing the most are the loudest voices in the room, which tend to be the craziest voices in the room. People start to see the other side as, not human, and, or less than human, or something different. And just think to yourself, like, some of the news things you've seen on the news, seen things happen to people where they might have been, let's say, physically hurt or in danger. Depending on what group those people are in, you may be less or more disturbed by that image. And you can tell it by the comments that people leave. And once again, loudest voices in the room. But I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but just seeing somebody in danger of, say, being struck by a motor vehicle or what have you, or being pushed over by somebody, depending on which group you're identifying with, you can find that distressing, or you can almost get like a sense of righteous anger, like, yeah, you're right, damn straight. That's unsettling, and that is very dangerous, because as a whole, society, not just in my country, but in the world, is tremendously fractured. And the more we see these images, the more we become fractured. And, it's not cool. It's not cool. And it's something that happens in just about every sphere. I mean, heck, I used to talk about this in role-playing games an awful lot, because people would get into different camps of what they felt was right or wrong, or the right way to play, or you're doing this crazy, and you could still see it today, if you're a role-playing gamer. And over things that really aren't as life and death and as serious as some of the things that we watch now. And, they get that mad about it and that tribal about it. And I remember having discussions with my friend Anthony, because, I like to understand people. And sometimes in understanding people, you kind of put them in different groups. So this is what they like, or maybe, this person would be more receptive to this or that or the other thing. And, he's still very anti-labels, and I understand it. And, I try not to label people as much as possible, because, once again, that kind of, puts a division between us, and which can be, we're already divisive enough. It's the ability to understand each other without, forgetting that, first and foremost, we're all human beings, for God's sakes. Even the ultra-rich, we're all human beings. And, seeing each other as that first is important, I believe. Because if you're not seeing the people that you disagree with as human beings, or somehow lesser, or you just see them as crazy or somehow deficient, you're never going to have a real dialogue with them. And when we're fighting evolution here, as far as that's concerned, we're fighting how our brains actually work, or part of our brains work, which is sad. That can be very, very frustrating. And so that's one of the things that's got my attention right now. That has my it has my attention, because it can be so distressing. And here's another thing, as things are crazy in the world, it's really important not to get, sorry about my hand being in the picture, I need to stand up for a second. It's really important to not get so drawn out or so wrapped up in everything that's happening that you lose sight of, your own life, or you outsource your happiness or your peace of mind to the things that are happening, in the world. Because there's always going to be something happening in the world. And if you're going to be completely, have your mood dependent upon that, well, that's not awesome. That's not awesome. That's not a healthy way to go and live your life. I just need to check something while I talk to you here today. And my daughter's really mad because the water heater keeps on turning off, keeps on blowing a circuit breaker. She wants me to do something about it right now. What am I going to do, honey? What am I going to do? Yeah, and the cat's still here. Cat's still enjoying the stay and enjoying hanging out with us. So we're going to keep her here for a little while. So there's that. I think as far as things like finances go, or economics go, it can be the same. The people on top, I think, very often don't see the rest of us as human. And I don't mean that because they're evil, but when you're on a different ideological side, it can be really easy to just see people as lesser, or pawns or whatever. I suppose some of them do see us as pawns. They see us as resources. It's hard not to see people as resources when you're in charge of people. When I was a department manager at Walmart, and when I was a supervisor of the back room for a little while, I had, it was one of my experiences supervising people, and I did end up seeing some of my guys as resources, because I needed to get something done or else I'd get into trouble, and I couldn't do it all myself, so they had to be, they had to help me out. And so I can see how that mindset can expand, the more people you have working for you, or making your dream come true, or building your empire, or all this other BS. And then you can look at other people as consumers or customers. I mean, certainly when I was selling tie-dyes way back in the 80s and making them and stuff like that, I'd go to a show, and the various people there at that moment, before I went to the show myself, were potential customers. And yes, they were human beings, but they were potential customers, and so they were resources to a certain extent, And when I was, really caught out in active addiction, well, they got really, really ugly, because I saw people as resources or obstacles. And I think, we can also have that same thing happen, when we're talking about, say, the upper class, and we're mad at them, or we're mad because of where they are, because of privilege and what have you, and you can start to see them as somewhat less than human, And it's one of those things, it's always funny how mad people get when you start talking about this. Because a lot of the things I talk about, a lot of things I see really involve issues which are really, they're important, and it very often involves one group of people taking advantage of the other group of people. Or having to understand, this is the way the system works, the system is rigged, and, you got to do something about it for yourself. So you're already, you're already seeing that, but also saying, hey, you know what, you need to kind of step back and see people for being people as well, and trying to understand where they're coming from. Because when we're just shouting at each other and pointing fingers, whether it's, through class war and saying, well, you're just, you just have class envy, that's why you want to tax the rich, or whether you're pointing at each other over some of the other things that are happening right now, say in the United States, where people are really, really heated, forget that the other people are human beings. And I'm not talking about the people at the top or the loudest voices in the room. I'm talking about the normal people. It's funny, as I see various issues come up, and I've seen this for a long time, but I think it's more salient right now because the issues are so emotionally charged. I see people that I know and love, people that like each other, people all of a sudden, being on different sides and saying some pretty awful things and looking at each other with disdain and the unfriending frenzies and all this kind of stuff. And I get it. I understand because I can have those emotional reactions too when something is really, really, there's an issue you really feel strongly about. But, and so people get, I've had comments on some of my shorts and lately, one or two shorts or videos where I talk about the idea of like, hey man, unity is really important. We're tearing ourselves apart. And the amount of angry comments I get from people on both sides where, they're just like, well, no, these people, it's good versus evil. Or, you don't understand, these other people are snowflakes and they, they shout louder. You just look, and yeah, we're not seeing each other. We're seeing each other as something other than human. We're seeing each other with disdain. And, it's one thing to say, hey, I disagree with you. I disagree with your ideology. Let's talk about this and try to figure out why you believe that. It's another thing to have the ad hominem attacks, where you're just saying, you're a bad person. And yes, there are bad people out there. Make no mistake about it. But I see all these people that are on the other side than I am on some of these issues. And I know them. I know they're not bad people. They just believe different things. And some of that's because the facts they have gotten have been different. Some of that is, and of course the internet does the echo chamber thing now too. I'm sure some of it is just due to, things they were taught since they were children, And I'm not saying that people don't need to unlearn some pretty awful stuff. I'm not saying that at all. Self included. I'm no angel. I was brought up during the 70s, and everybody has their own story. Everybody has their own prejudices or viewpoints or views about certain groups of people that disagree with them or are different from them. And it's easy, to just consider people stupid. And while that might make you feel better and better about yourself, it doesn't really help solve any of the issues. And so that's just something to consider. And I try to consider that all the time because otherwise it's so easy to get so caught up. The things had me so caught up a little while ago that Susan and I couldn't really think of anything else, or we were both kind of angry and anxious and all this other kind of stuff. And you have to take this deep breath, like, okay, that's not, that's serious. It's something to consider, something to talk about, but it doesn't mean that you should burn your life down over it. And some people do that. They burn their lives down over, or they let it just dominate themselves. And this is our one shot, dude. And I'm not saying don't do stuff, to support causes you believe in, but, you're not Atlas. I'm not Atlas. We're not going to change the world ourselves. You can only put so much effort into something, and, you have to balance the rest of your life. And don't feel guilty. I think that's the biggest thing. Don't feel guilty because you can't change or fix something. Hell, I see things all the time I can't change or fix. I drive by these guys sometimes that are out there panhandling, and having been in recovery makes me look at that a lot different. And I see these guys, and you can see the look in their face that I used to have, and they're strung out. And I would love to help them, even if it's just giving them some money for that day. And sometimes I have like $5 and I'll give it to the dude, and sometimes I don't. And there's times I just feel guilty because I can't do more, or I can't help this. What am I going to do? Drag this person and bring them to a rehab? We know that doesn't work. There's so many areas in my life where I wish I could do more to help other people or to change situations that I find distressing. And the truth is, one, I can't do it all, and two, I'm having trouble handling all things in my own life. Just like everybody else. We only have so many hours in a day. We only have so much energy and so many resources. And my mailman must be here or something. Dogs are getting pissed off upstairs. It's okay. They look scary, but they're not scary. But they won't kill you. It's just crazy, man. Because we just need to realize that we can take care of our own lives. And even in a case like that, there's only so much we can do. Right now here, I'm home from work because I broke my foot, it turns out. on New Year's Day. And I went to work for a week not knowing that it was broken. Just thinking it was a bad sprain. And finally got it checked out. Now I'm wearing a boot and all that kind of stuff. There are things, every day that I can do to eventually get rid of that job. And so I do them, but there's only so much I can do in a given day. I also have to go to the job. Today, I'm hobbling around. There's things I want to do around here. I can't do as many things as I want to do because, I can't be on my feet that much. It's frustrating. It's frustrating normally because I don't have enough hours to do it, and I come home and I'm tired. It's frustrating that I, still have not put a band together with my girlfriend Susan, which I really desperately want to. And, ADHD and all this other stuff, and I keep on forgetting, or I've got all these other things with these other bands. And, life demands on my life. And so I feel horrible about it. And, need to lose weight, and just take care of my health better. But, all these things require a certain amount of effort every single day. And it's hard to spin all those plates and juggle everything. And that's in my own life, in your own life. Because I know you have stuff like that too. Unless you can teach the rest of us how to do all that and stay sane, we all have all that stuff. So trying to, the guilt that people feel already for not doing enough in their own freaking lives, I'm not improving myself enough. I'm not, learning this and learning that and developing this skill. And, dude, I get it. And we can guilt ourselves even more because, at a certain age, you start to see the end of the road. It's different when you're 25 and you think to yourself, I want to do all these things because I want to, have this great trajectory on my life or stay healthy and whatever it is. It's a little bit different like when you're Gen Xer like me and so you're 57, almost 58. Dude, that's ridiculous. And you realize that, your mortality is actually real. I go to wakes now every once in a while. And not just for people in recovery, but for people around my age or their parents or what have you. And I got to this point where I'm at a gig last week and I'm sitting around bunch of these guys and I'm talking about having sprained my ankle, and this other guy was talking about the surgery he had, and another guy was talking about surgery. And we're all of an age and we're all pretty cool people, And I'm like, guys, whoa, wait a minute. I'm like flashing back to 40 years ago or more, 45 years ago, being in my grandparents' house, listening to them and their friends talk about this kind of shit, and I think they were younger than us. So my point is, when you're of an age where you can see there's only so much time left, the sense of urgency becomes far greater. That I need to get in shape. I need to get an income so I can, retire. I need to quit this goddamn job. I need to, maybe get a relationship that's stable. I need, all this kind of stuff. And that sense of anxiety or urgency can make you feel even more guilty about not getting enough done. I don't feel like I'm doing enough. And, that can weigh on you so heavily. And I believe a lot of people are walking around with that. That kind of grief and angst and beating themselves up. I'm just not doing enough. So you add on top of that, oh my God, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. I should be doing something about that too. Not saying you shouldn't help, but to take all that weight on, and I think some of us do that. I know some people do that. I know some of my friends more than others get so much angst. I have friends that are dog rescuers, and and if any of you are, know me from RPGs, my friend Anthony, he's got a bunch of dogs. He treats them like really, really well. But I have friends over here in the States that are dog rescuers, and some of them have gone around the twist, and they do wonderful things, but they're trying to take on the entire thing. And good for them, because the dogs upstairs are rescue dogs. This cat is a rescue cat. But there's this point where people start to, and it's easy to do, to feel like they need to take it all of it on. Hell, it's bad enough. I mean, the way the algorithms work on things like Facebook now, if you look at one freaking dog, or you say something about your rescue dog, they're blasting you. And I'm looking at all these cute faces thinking, oh, they're so awesome. Yeah, I didn't even want mammals ever again. Once I had cichlids and fish for a long time and realized there was no hair in the house, I'm like, this is awesome. But you look at these things, oh my goodness, and you have to stop yourself because you feel guilty because you're not going and adopting this other animal that's going to make your life completely unmanageable. Can you relate? I mean, that's just, it's psychotic what we put ourselves through. So I think that's one of those things. I don't, I don't know how to solve the problems of the world. I used to think I knew back when I was younger. And I've gone all the way around the political spectrum. And, I'll tell you, there's no answer. There's no easy answer. And utopia isn't an option. And there's always so much nuance to consider, and so many things going on. And it really is like the trolley problem sometimes. Who are you going to kill? Who are you going to let die? So I don't, corruption aside, I wouldn't want to trade places with some of the leaders that we have because of that amount of responsibility.